screen share.
When can I have the mouse?
Okay. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to Just for the Health of It Update 2020. First of all, I want to thank our Adult Ed Committee for the support we get every year. This is our third year. A lot happened this year, so there'll be some new information about pandemics, etc. Thank you to Judy and Christine for all your help always in setting things up.
Wendy.
And to Susan Lerman for the tech support today. She's going to be helping us with the questions. If you have questions, please write them in the chat because we are going to be muting you during the talk. There should be some time for questions after the presentation. So hopefully we'll get to them. And if not, you can contact me through email and we can answer your questions there. Oops, I just have to get to the PowerPoint. Oops.
We're singing via Zoom.
All right, so 1 second.
We could put this up on the
Wait a
table.
minute.
No, 1 minute.
We'll talk, they're gonna talk.
Okay, so again, please copy down my email if you want any, if you have any questions, or also there is a handout, which obviously I can't hand out, but I can email it to you. So just email me and I will send you the handout.
And then resources.
And it's a list of resources and also suggestions for cookbooks and websites and so forth. Okay. I'd like to introduce Stephen Hiller, who happens to be my husband. He's going to be talking about a plant-based whole foods lifestyle, which is for our health and for the health of our planet. He's been doing a lot of research for about, practicing it and doing the research for about 11 years. And most recently, he has been researching the causes and results of pandemics. Okay, so we're going to begin. Dr. Hiller.
Okay, good morning, everybody. For those of you who do not yet know me, I'm Steve Hiller, and I'm here with my beautiful wife, Janet, who you just met. I'm a 78-year-old retired physician. I like to say I'm a recovering physician. And I underwent coronary artery stenting about 14 years ago. At that time, I became convinced that a plant-based diet was the best way to assure improved health. Janet and I have both been vegan advocates ever since. Talk out of line.
May I interrupt for just a second? I'm having difficulty muting everyone. So I would ask everybody to mute yourselves, please. And we'll unmute at the end for questions.
How do we mute ourselves?
Go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a little microphone that says mute and click on it.
What was that?
Jordan.
And you know what? We can't see Stephen in the participants box. We see the beautiful face of Janet and only a quarter of Stephen.
Okay, I'm going to move him over. Here. Can you see him now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Is that good or bad?
You can't.
Okay.
It's too close.
Okay.
Move the camera further
Okay.
away.
All right, we're going to continue.
All right, so you can see the picture of obese me. I've lost 65 pounds since then. That picture was taken 14 years ago, just before my stents were done. The reason that fool is smiling is it was at a restaurant here on Siesta Key, Turtles, and I was waiting for the food. All of my lab values have improved, some remarkably. Next slide.
Hold
Oh,
on.
we're having some.
No, relax, it's coming. Oops. Where's my, here it is. Okay.
Yeah, the outline of the talk today, you can now see it's including Jewish values, personal health, pandemics, the environment, and how these things all relate to a whole food plant-based diet. Next slide. The advantages of a plant-based diet extend not only to our personal health, but also to issues of the environment, animal rights, the pandemic, and our Jewish values. And we're going to start with that now. What you're looking at are pictures of two books by Richard Schwartz. A Plant-Based Lifestyle is consonant not only with our physical and mental health, but also with our spiritual health as Jews. This is greatly expanded upon by Richard Schwartz in his books Judaism and Vegetarianism and Vegan Revolution. Next. By not eating meat, Jews are actually fulfilling many mitzvot, showing compassion to animals, preserving personal health, protecting the environment, conserving natural resources, and helping to feed the hungry. We'll touch on each of these today. Jewish scripture makes clear that veganism is the ideal Jewish diet, and for those who are not Jewish as well. In the very first chapter of the Torah, it is written, quote, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing herb, which is upon the surface of the entire earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. It will be yours for food." And this comes, of course, from Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. However, God also gave us dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of heaven and every living thing that moved upon the earth. Our sages consider the word dominion to imply responsible stewardship over those animals. Jewish tradition forbids cruelty to animals. We're expected to treat them with compassion. Unfortunately, the conditions under which animals are raised for food today involve placing them in dense numbers in huge facilities, and this is only to seek maximum profit. Animals are treated as industrial units rather than the sentient beings that they are. The suffering of cows begins almost from the moment of birth. They're commonly dehorned, castrated, and branded without anesthesia or painkillers. A domestic cow's lifespan would normally be about 25 years. But for dairy cows who are sent to slaughter when milk production wanes, it's usually 5 years, not 25. In addition, most newborn calves in the US are separated from their mothers within 12 hours of birth, so as not to usurp any of that valuable milk meant for human consumption. This is traumatic and cruel to both. I don't want to be too graphic. And you can find it in the resources later on. In the next part of this talk, we'll take a fairly deep dive into physical and mental personal health. This has particular resonance for Jews, since preserving one's health is arguably one of the most important mitzvot. Of the 613 mitzvot, 610 of them must be violated if considered necessary to help save a life. Next.
All right.
Okay. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, and autoimmune disorders can all be classified as chronic diseases. All are modifiable with lifestyle changes, most importantly, diet. Time doesn't permit a detailed discussion of all of these disorders, but because heart disease is our #1 killer, we'll talk about that now. But remember, what's healthy for the heart is healthy for every other organ as well. Next. Shortly after my stents, one of my physician friends suggested that I read Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. I read it in a single night and became an instant convert to a plant-based diet. For anyone who wants an easy-to-read primer on heart disease and how to beat it, I strongly recommend this book. Dr. Esselstyn distills the essence of our diet with the phrase, "Eat nothing with a mother or a face." Next slide.
Do that.
Don't do that. She gets up and,
Well, because you didn't do the right thing.
because I did.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
He says, don't eat anything with a mother or a face. What we,
Okay.
no, that's what I wanted. What we actually do eat are fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. And what we avoid, like poison, because they are, is meat, poultry, fish, dairy, and
Eggs.
eggs. I can't see it.
I know, I have to remember this.
Next. Janet has a different take on our diet. Next. That says I don't eat anything that poops. And one of my friends sent a slide. Next. Dear vegans, I killed this cow because it was eating your food. You're welcome. Friends, I don't think we eat a lot of grass, but you're welcome to your own opinion. Our diet is referred to as a whole food plant-based diet. Whole food indicating that we try to avoid processed foods. Pepsi and potato chips are certainly vegan. They are plant-based, but they are not healthy, and they're highly processed. Next. Heart disease is the leading cause of death in America. It's responsible for between 30 and 40% of all deaths in this country. Where am I? Okay. When we say heart disease, in the narrowest sense, we mean that the arteries that supply blood to the heart muscle have become obstructed with plaque. And if you look at this diagram, we call them coronary arteries because somebody pictured them as being like a crown around the upper portion of the heart, and then they splay out along the muscle of the heart, and they feed that heart muscle. This artery in particular, the vein is the blue, the red is the artery. This artery in particular is called the left anterior descending artery. It has an unfortunate nickname. It's also known as the widowmaker. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that artery in a few minutes. When we say heart disease, in the narrowest sense, we mean that the arteries that supply blood to the heart muscle have become obstructed with plaque, and they are the coronary arteries. If that obstruction is happening to the coronary arteries, you can bet it's also happening to all the arteries in the body. Those supply the brain, the kidneys, the whole body. Next slide. Therefore, the better name for this disorder is cardiovascular disease, implying that all of our blood vessels are involved, not just those feeding the heart. By the way, if all of our blood vessels were placed end to end, they would extend out about 60,000 miles. That's 2.5 times around the equator of the Earth. It's also an awful lot of opportunity for obstruction. We can also think that heart disease and stroke are essentially the same disease, just affecting different parts of the body. Next. Who's at risk? Why are you doing this? Who's at risk for cardiovascular disease? Well, autopsies were performed on our young soldiers who were killed in action all the way from the Korean War up to the present. Average age of death, 22 years. And 80% of our youngsters at 22 years of age already had visible plaque in their coronary arteries. When the Asian soldiers on the other side of the battlefield were autopsied, only 3% of them showed similar evidence. 3%, not 80. And we must remember, folks, that those soldiers on the Asian side came from mostly plant-based countries in those days. Plaque, next slide. Plaque is what causes atherosclerosis, and that's what we call hardening of the arteries. And yes, the primary component of plaque is a form of cholesterol. But cholesterol is not really the bad guy. Try to think of cholesterol as a bandage that our body applies to injured portions of the artery wall. We think that free radicals cause the actual damage to those arteries. Free radicals are not kids brought up in the 60s. They are rather nasty chemicals formed when we metabolize food, smoke cigarettes, or when we're exposed to radiation or toxins. Free radicals are strong oxidizing agents, and for that reason, they can be neutralized by the antioxidants in plant foods. Animal foods, not so much. Animals do not synthesize antioxidants. They get them by ingesting plants, as we should. Next slide. if we were to look at a segment of a coronary artery, and excuse my drawings, yes, those are supposed to be coronary arteries, we would see the plaque, the yellow stuff. And in some areas, it becomes quite thick and obstructs blood flow to varying degrees. The arrow is supposed to tell us the direction of the blood flow. If obstruction is severe, that is more than 70% of the diameter of the artery. If obstruction is severe, we may experience angina, which is a sense of tightness in the chest, and it occurs on exertion most of the time. It's a sign that the heart muscle is not receiving enough oxygen. But a heart attack usually occurs when plaque ruptures, as you see in this picture over here, and when the fat, the cholesterol, and the pus are released into the bloodstream, a blood clot quickly forms around that debris and then totally obstructs that portion of the artery. The portion of heart muscle supplied by that artery is now deprived of blood and oxygen, and that part of the heart dies if the obstruction persists. In 88% of heart attacks, it is not the older, more stable plaque that ruptures. Incidentally, this thick black line is meant to represent scar tissue, or what we call a cap. It's the newer plaque down here that has a very thin, a gossamer thin cap, and that cap can easily be sheared off by blood flowing past it at high velocity. And that's what happened here. So 88% of heart attacks occur in plaque that we usually cannot see on any test except autopsy. So the older plaque is called stable plaque. Pardon me, Janet. The older plaque is called stable plaque. The newer plaque is called unstable plaque. And unstable plaque can rarely be seen on any test except autopsy. Okay, what about stents, Janet? Next slide.
I have to move the,
What about stents? Stents look like a cylindrical, you can see on the right side over here, they look like a cylindrical wire mesh cage. And then we go over to the left side. In this artery, you can see the plaque, the yellow stuff that's narrowing the artery. The stent has been collapsed and loaded onto a catheter, which is just this long blue tube that you're seeing. And there's a balloon in the end of the catheter. In this picture, you can see that the balloon has been expanded. The catheter is introduced into an artery in the groin, threaded up into the chest and into one of the coronary arteries. And the cardiologist then injects a dye, which can be seen on an X-ray. And we'll see one of those X-rays later. It's called an angiogram. The dye shows the narrowed segment. It doesn't actually demonstrate the plaque, but it does show the narrowing in the artery. The cardiologist says to himself, this is where blood is not flowing very well. This is where I need to put the stent. So he blows up the balloon, it expands the stent, and then the balloon is collapsed and withdrawn with the catheter, and that leaves this stent in place, hopefully maintaining the widened area in the artery. So what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that the stent is placed where the obstruction is greatest and not where the heart attack is most likely to occur. We know for this reason that stents and bypass grafts do not prolong life by a minute unless they are placed during a heart attack. During the heart attack, they can actually see the clot that's forming, and they know that that's where to put the stent, and that does save lives, but it's a rare event to be able to put in a stent during a heart attack. Next slide. I tend to visualize this problem this way. These fellas are trying to mop up the flood, but they're not paying attention to the spigot. They have not turned off the faucet. They're treating the effect, not the cause. What's the spigot in our case? It's a lousy diet that gives us a shower of free radicals that injure arteries, and then cholesterol is applied to those injuries as plaque. Okay, next slide. My friends, if you think that you're genetically destined to develop heart disease, I've got some good news for you. Genes play a much smaller role in chronic diseases than we used to believe. Dr. Esselstyn, whose book you saw before, would say genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. We now believe that lifestyle accounts for 85 to 90% of all outcomes, and genes only about 10 to 15%, if that. We also know that genes can be turned on or off by certain factors like diet, exercise, smoking, radiation. We refer to this turning on and off as gene expression. Next. As an example, the Pima Indians in Arizona adopted our Western diet many years ago, and they suffer high rates of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. A group of them, the Tarahumara, split off and moved to northern Mexico many decades ago. They maintained their traditional plant-based diet. They have 0 incidence of heart disease, no heart attacks, and a much longer lifespan than their Pima cousins, even though they share the same gene pool. Next. So the last couple of pictures I showed you were the catheter introduced into an artery. The artery had dye introduced into it. And here you're looking at an angiogram. In 1985, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, whose book you saw before, he studied 24 patients at the Cleveland Clinic. They all had cardiovascular disease, 6 of them so severely that their cardiologists told them, don't bother with any further procedures, they won't help. You might as well go home, sit in a rocking chair, and wait for the inevitable. However, Dr. Esselstyn treated those folks with a plant-based diet and demonstrated by angiogram that they were reversing heart disease. You can see this ratty area here. And again, you'll notice this does not outline the actual plaque. It just shows that the artery, the segment of the artery carrying blood, has become much smaller. We call that opening of the artery the lumen. And without any surgery, without any medication, 32 months later on a plant-based diet, that same artery in that same patient looks like this. So we now know that a whole food plant-based diet can reverse coronary artery disease, and it's the only way to do so. Next slide. Another powerful example occurred during World War II, and these red and white lines represent heart attacks and strokes, basically cardiovascular disease. And you can see this occurred in the low-lying countries of Europe, Norway, Belgium, Holland, and Denmark. When the Axis powers overran those 4 countries, the Germans occupied those countries and took all of the livestock to feed their own troops. And that basically turned those 4 countries into plant-based populations. And you can see here in 1939, and we all know what happened then, that was the outbreak of World War II. The Germans took all of the livestock for themselves, turned those countries into plant-based populations, and heart attacks and strokes plummeted to almost 0 for 4 years, up until 1944, maybe 5 years. Wow, who knew those Germans were such great healthcare educators? Then in 1945, with the cessation of hostilities, in 1945, the meat returns, the dairy returns, so do the heart attacks and the strokes.
Next.
Yeah, next slide. But do you really need to be strictly plant-based? Well, my friends, I had a patient who came to me one day and said, Doc, I heard what you had to say, but I don't want to eat that crazy diet of yours more than 5 days a week. What do you say I have what I want on the weekends? How would that help? And I told him that would probably help. You'll have a smaller heart attack, only moderate dementia, and only a small amount of erectile dysfunction. And yes, my friends, erectile dysfunction, we have a nickname. We call it the canary in the coal mine because it is an all too good predictor of cardiovascular disease. We know that when erectile dysfunction begins, that the symptoms of heart disease are about 4 years behind. Okay, I won't change anything. All chronic diseases are modifiable by lifestyle change, even the earlier forms of Alzheimer's. Full-blown Alzheimer's disease, however, is horrible and inexorable. Alzheimer's is the disease probably responsible for the greatest level of human suffering. Next. As with heart disease, however, and stroke, we believe that Alzheimer's disease is primarily a vascular disorder related to blood vessels and is related to cholesterol metabolism. And if you look at this slide, these are the arteries of elderly patients. Well, they're not elderly anymore. And on the left side of the slide, you can see the vessels, the blood vessels from the brains of non-demented patients. On this side are the blood vessels of patients with Alzheimer's disease. They are horribly obstructed. That little black area right there is what's left of the lumen that blood can flow through. Next slide. The hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, however, is not those plaques that you saw a moment ago. It's a different type of plaque. We call it beta amyloid. And those plaques are scattered throughout the brain tissue. They are not within the arteries. Each beta amyloid plaque is actually formed around a crystal of cholesterol. And we know that if your blood level of cholesterol is 250 or higher, that your risk of Alzheimer's triples. There is a gene called the APOE4 epsilon allele. You'll be tested later. And this does significantly increase the risk for Alzheimer's. But a plant-based diet cuts even that risk by 80%. And that, my friends, is the power of plants. Think of Alzheimer's as a house with 36 holes in the roof. We know this because there are at least 36 different factors that impact Alzheimer's disease. Therefore, a single medication will never be likely to patch all of those holes. We know that concentrating on prevention is the only way to treat this disease. We know that a plant-based lifestyle would prevent 90% of the cases of Alzheimer's. All in all, my friends, between 400 and 800,000 Americans die annually of cardiovascular disease. Next, we're going to discuss pandemics. But I ask you, does not 400 to 800,000 Americans sound like a pandemic? Okay, next slide. Believe it or not, all pandemics that we suffer arise from animals, but only after we domesticate the animals that we eat and subject them to high density confinement. This is called factory farming next, or intensive farming. And this is what it looks like. These are birds in a hen house or in this huge poultry area. It's usually dark. It's only lighted because of the picture. This shed houses between 20 and 100,000 chickens. And we call that intensive farming or factory farming. And again, that's done only for the purposes of profit. It causes sickness in those animals and eventually in us as well. Unfortunately, factory farming also increases not only profit, but the rates of viral mutation in those animals, ensuring that one or more of those mutations will eventually allow that virus to make the leap from those animals to the human population. All human viral infections are believed to originate in animals coronavirus is from bats, and influenza virus is from birds. Some virologists believe that COVID-19 is only a warm-up. It's a dress rehearsal for the next pandemic. And they believe that an influenza virus will be the culprit. Influenza viruses originated millions of years ago, and the primordial source is aquatic birds, ducks. The virus seems to reside harmlessly in the gut of ducks, doesn't do them any harm. Duck flu viruses, however, don't seem to grow well in humans. The evolutionary gulf between duck and human is so wide and so broad that an intermediate host is needed. And you're looking at that host here, poultry, chickens. The flu virus that is keeping virologists up at night is called H5N1. You're not going to be tested on this. And although it has caused a few outbreaks in humans since 1997, it still hasn't learned human-to-human transmission very well. It may be but several mutations from an 8 billion strong human buffet. Next slide. In contradistinction to the previous slide, what you're now looking at, we call a free-range operation or a backyard flock. And when ducks fly over a farm of free-ranging chickens and the ducks drop their infected fecal bombs, it's rare to see a large number of chickens becoming infected. But most chickens are not raised outdoors in sunlight, but rather in darkened sheds, just like you saw before, that house up to 100,000 birds. Those birds are cramped into a space so small, they can't stretch out even one wing. They sleep on a fecal carpet, beak to beak, and if one becomes infected, you can bet they all do. Also, the decaying feces generates ammonia, which is highly inflammatory to the lungs of those chickens, making them even more susceptible to disease. The USDA has shown that you can dramatically increase how lethal a virus becomes. This is important. How lethal a virus becomes by passing it through chickens in multiple cycles. In fact, that can be done with most animals. It is only when viruses, but no highly lethal virus has ever emerged from a backyard flock or a free-range operation. It is only when viruses find their way into high-density confinement facilities that they can become more lethal and more transmissible to other species, us, for example. Viruses that figure out how to spread via the respiratory route or the venereal route have the ability to infect millions of humans. Of those two routes, however, it's a lot easier for us to practice safe sex than it is for us to stop breathing. Next. The deadliest pandemic in history, no, the deadliest human event in all of history was the 1918 flu, the so-called Spanish flu. And it was responsible for between 50 and 100 million human deaths worldwide. In Europe, it killed between 1/3 and half of the entire European population. Its case fatality rate was only 2%. That means that if 100 people were infected, 2% of them died. The virus that was keeping virologists up at night, H5N1, has a 50% case fatality rate. 1 out of every 2 people infected will die. H5N1, however, in small, I said that already, pardon me. So remember, H5N1 arose in ducks, then infected chickens, and is now looking for the next leap, humans. The only way to prevent this viral leap is to allow those chickens back out into the sunlight, where they are no longer crowded, where their excrement dries in the breeze and can no longer support bacterial and viral growth, and where also indeed the sunlight and ultraviolet light kills the virus. Incidentally, eating chickens is the single greatest cause of foodborne illness, E. coli, salmonella, and others. And this is responsible for the death of about 20 million people worldwide every year. I know you're going to ask about eating free-range chickens, so let me clarify. It is still animal protein and therefore causes and exacerbates heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Folks, one last word on pandemics. A plant-based lifestyle can prevent or reverse all of the underlying conditions that make COVID-19 so dangerous and deadly.
Excellent. Next.
Yep. We're going to go on now to pandemics.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, we just did that, didn't we?
Environment.
We're going to go on to the environment. I'd like to quote C. David Coates, not quotes, the author of Old MacDonald's Factory Farm. He eloquently, that was for you, Barry. He eloquently describes the cycle of misery in this way. Quote, aren't humans amazing? They kill wildlife, birds, deer, all kinds of cats, coyotes, beavers, groundhogs, mice, and foxes by the million in order to protect their domestic animals and their feed. Then they kill domestic animals by the billions and eat them. This in turn kills people by the millions because eating all those animals leads to degenerative and fatal health conditions like heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, and cancer. So then humans spend billions of dollars torturing and killing millions more animals to look for cures for these diseases. Elsewhere, millions of other human beings are being killed by hunger and malnutrition because food they could eat is being used to fatten domestic animals. Meanwhile, few people recognize the absurdity of humans who kill so easily and violently, and once a year send out cards praying for peace on earth, unquote. At this point, I would like to thank and give credit to Dr. Michael Clapper, who is a friend and a mentor. And he inspired this final section of our discussion on environmental issues. My friends, every 3.6 seconds, someone dies on this planet of hunger or malnutrition, and 3 out of every 4 of them are children. Next. It's becoming increasingly clear that the majority of environmental destruction comes from animal agriculture. The single most important and tragic result of animal agriculture is deforestation and its catastrophic results. Next. Humans have been cutting down trees since the dawn of civilization. Here in the US, about half of our trees have been lost since the white man arrived. Next. And these are the consequences of deforestation, and we'll go into them one by one very briefly. Next slide. Here's what it looks like. It's hard to see the years on these, so we're going to start in 1620. In 1620, before the white man set foot on this continent, the tree cover was so thick that here in Florida, a squirrel could leap up into a tree and jump tree to tree to tree, all the way up into northern Minnesota, even Canada, without ever having to set foot on the ground. Then 230 years later, in 1850, now a few million European Americans were on the continent, and you can see that there's a little bit of thinning beginning to occur in the tree cover here in the Midwest and again in the Northeast. But 130 years later, in 1920, with the invention of the power chainsaw and diesel logging trucks, it is obvious we have denuded the land of trees. Next. And here's the primordial sin. Nope. Oh yeah. And why was the land cleared? The land was cleared in the vast majority of cases to grow animals for their flesh or to grow food to feed those animals. Also, 70% of all the corn and soybean crops grown in the US serve to feed those animals and not to nourish humanity. Next. In South America, rainforest is being cleared at a rate of 4,000 acres every hour. Next. And here's the primordial sin. To keep those forests from regrowing, they are burned. My friends, this is a satellite photograph taken over a 10-day span in May of 2019. And what you're looking at in red are all the fires burning on Earth, primarily to clear forest land or to prevent cleared land from returning to forest. Next. All for the sake of animal flesh, we are burning planet Earth. And when forest is burned, the carbon in the wood is emitted into the air as carbon dioxide. And as you all know, this is a greenhouse gas that causes global warming. When trees are lost, so is our ability to draw CO2 back down from the air. Next. Now that cleared land has grown grass that cows will eat and belch out methane. They belch it out into the environment. This is a major cause of greenhouse gas emission. More greenhouse gases have been emitted from land use change than from the burning of all fossil fuels, again, to satisfy our appetite for meat. Since 1790, roughly the onset of the Industrial Revolution, 240 billion tons of CO2 has been released into the atmosphere. We would say 240 gigatons. I want you to remember that number for a little while. We'll get back to it. Next. Now we're going to talk about soil erosion, another consequence of deforestation. We are plundering the soils. Without the root systems of all those trees, the soils get washed into the lakes and rivers with every rainstorm. Next. But the problem doesn't end there with soil erosion because that soil is toxic. It has been drenched with insecticides and herbicides, and that toxicity kills most of the plants and the fish in the water. But also we have drenched that soil with fertilizer containing phosphate and ammonia. And when all that toxic runoff washes into the Gulf of Mexico here, it sets off a hellacious bloom of algae. The algae dies, and as it does, it oxidizes, sucking all of the oxygen out of the water. This creates a hypoxic dead zone in the Gulf, the size of the state of New Jersey. Nothing can live in that area, yet another result of our voracious appetite for meat. Next. And next is the issue of water depletion. And this chart shows that 1/3 of the world's water consumption is dedicated to producing animal products. Also, just growing crops to feed those animals consumes more than half of the water in the US. And this is what amazes me. 1 pound of beef requires 1,800 gallons of water. Next. But what about water pollution? Well, intensive animal farming produces 1 billion tons of manure every year. This is about the weight of 10,000 of our heaviest aircraft carriers. It grossly contaminates our rivers and groundwater. Glyphosate, also known as Roundup, is a particularly nasty chemical herbicide that's been connected to everything from cancer to autism. It is water soluble, so it gets into our rivers, our streams, and has even been found in the Arctic ice. Deforestation is also responsible for species extinction. Those forests used to be teeming with hundreds of millions of birds and animals gone. Next. And here, my friends, is a number that should make your eyes water. On planet Earth, we raise, slaughter, and eat 74 billion land animals every year. What right do we have to inflict such pain and misery on 74 billion living creatures. Where are our Jewish values now? Clearly, compassion has given way to greed. You should know that population growth and the shift to greater wealth means increased demand for animal protein. We can't even sustain demand at the present levels. All of these 74 billion animals are breathing out CO2. Also, there are billions of cattle belching out methane, and methane is 84 times as potent as CO2 as a greenhouse gas. The estimate is that animal agriculture is responsible for at least 87% of all greenhouse gas emissions now. We know that all forms of transportation produce significant emissions, but how can animals be responsible for that? Just ask yourself what's in all those trucks. What are all those trucks on the road carrying? Well, they're carrying the entire restaurant industry, the entire farming industry, and the fast food industry is also in all those trucks. Also, all that meat requires refrigeration, and the energy required for tractors, irrigation pumps, and meat processing. Next. It's not bad enough that we kill 74 billion land animals. We also kill between 1 and 3 trillion sea animals every year. We have strip mined the oceans. With every piece of salmon that we pull up in those nets, we also kill dozens of seabirds, turtles, dolphins, sharks. It's time to let the oceans heal, my friends. As Dr. Clapper would say, it's time to let the fish off the hook. Next. Also, the rate of global warming is increasing. The earth is indeed on fire. We're burning it. And what are we doing? This picture pretty much sums up our approach to the subject. Are we disturbing his putt? Why are we buying electric cars and sealing up our leaky windows to save energy without even looking at our own dinner plates? Next. What are the answers? What can we do that will save us and the earth? Do something else with the land. We don't have to run, what?
Stop eating animals.
Thank you. Do something else with the land. We don't have to run cattle and dairy operations on the land. Feeding humans directly with whole plant foods is so much more efficient than growing grains to feed animals and then slaughtering and eating the animals. A transition to a predominantly plant-based diet could feed all 9 billion people who will be here on Earth in 2050. And it could feed them a nourishing diet on a land mass 1/5 to 1/4 the size of the land we currently use for all food production. Here's the graphic. You can see here on the left, on a standard American diet, and that is abbreviated SADs, standard American diet, it is sad. A meat-eating American needs 2 football fields, you can see that, to feed 1 person per year. And over here on the right side, those same 2 football fields planted in green, convenient fruits and veggies and grains can feed 14 people, not 1, 14. If everyone in the world ate a plant-based diet, 5 billion football fields of land could be returned to forest. Next. What would happen if we all went vegan overnight? My dream. Well, we'd have no need for the animals or their food, and this would free up a landmass the size of Africa. Only 20% of this landmass would be needed to feed the 9 billion new herbivores. What could we do with the rest of the land? Of all the land no longer growing food for people or animals, maybe we could let half of it return to forest. Next. As the trees grow, they take CO2 out of the air. That's all we need to do, eat a plant-based diet and let the trees grow. The numbers work out so that once the new forest reaches maturity, it would be able to sequester 265 gigatons of CO2. I'm sure you all remember the number of gigatons of carbon now floating above us is about 240. So what if we all go vegan? Next slide, please. The earth heals, the forests will return, the soils will replenish, the rivers will run clean again, the oceans will begin to heal, the destructive warming will reduce, all people can be fed, and animal suffering can cease. My friends, let's heal ourselves, our children, and the earth. How's that for Tikkun Olam? Thank you.
Okay. All right, say you can unmute, well. Oops.
You can do it, Jenny. Go
All
ahead.
right, you can unmute yourselves and maybe Susan Lerman can find some of the questions on the chat. Yep.
There was one suggestion from Jerry Fleischer for everyone to, if they're interested, to watch A Life on This Planet by David Attenborough, which you could find on Netflix.
Good, thank you.
Okay,
No, I
thank you.
just want to correct it. You know, I looked on Netflix as we were talking, and it's called A Life on Our Planet.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So please note that. Thank you.
Oh,
A
great.
life on our planet. That's good.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see.
There's also two other notes in chat from Susan and Alice. It says, sounds like the AOC Green program is what we need. And Shimon to everyone says, excellent.
Oh, okay.
No comment.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Any other questions?
There are no other questions in chat. Does anyone else have a question? Take yourself off of mute, Adrian. There you go.
Yes, I do. I had two things in chat. First question was regarding heart disease. You said it's the leading killer in the United States. Is that leading killer in men and women?
Yes.
Or yes. Okay. And a second, I just put it in. So how does this plant-based diet transfer into daily consumption? What do you eat and
Handout.
what does it
Okay, that's
consist
the
of?
handout.
I'm going to refer you to our handout. If you send Janet your email, we'll be happy to mail you that. And there are lots of recipe books, cookbooks.
Websites,
Um,
websites.
there are also plant-based websites all over the place, easy to start. I wish I had more time in the talk to really discuss exactly how we go into a plant-based diet. But
Would
I
you put
wanted
the
to,
website, would you put the email back up in the chat?
My email? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me find it. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that. Let's see.
Put it in chat, Janet.
Where? In chat?
Put it in chat for everyone and they can all see it.
Okay, all right, good idea. Here we go. Let me unlock my caps. Oops.
While she's doing that, does anyone else have another question?
Yeah, I would like to. I buy all organic foods.
Good.
If I can't get organic, I get something with a non-GMO butterfly seal. But as far as organic foods, Steve, you didn't really go much into that. You're not going to get, you're going to get a fraction because we have the cross-pollination today, but you're not going to get the glyphosate. The organic chickens are even better than free-range chickens because they're kept out of doors more because of laws and.
they'll kill you organically, Barry.
What's that?
They will kill you organically,
Chickens.
the chickens.
No,
plants.
I know you think even if, I don't eat much meat. I'm that guy that, not on the weekends that I eat meat, but I eat a lot of non-meat meals. And even I drink almond milk. I try to avoid dairy where I can.
Good.
I don't do it 100%.
The
It's
answer to
like
your
that
question
person
on
who did the
organic,
weekend. I'll do it every day, but I'll limit my dairy and my meat.
Barry,
And
the answer to your question on organics
Yes, please.
is that they're just not all that important. And there was a lawsuit on GMO issues that a farmer planted one of the products from Monsanto, and
Mhm.
the seeds blew into an
I
organic
know,
form.
I
and
know
he
all about
began.
that. I talked about the cross pollination. I'm
Yeah.
aware of
Yes.
all that.
Yes, okay.
But
Um,
organic
so
is
organic-
by law 5%, 95% organic.
I
in
know,
order to get a
I
organic
know, Barry,
Yeah,
Barry, what's important, it's more important to eat the plants.
yeah.
If you can get organic, yes, that's a little better, and they have shown that the nutrient level in them is a little higher.
Yeah, but I won't eat the Impossible Burger, for instance, because it's genetically modified and it was very
it's fat.
controversially approved. How
And
do you
it has
feel about-
18 grams of fat, and it has 420 milligrams of sodium.
Very bad for you.
Yeah, so
It's
you don't,
nasty stuff.
but you're not in favor of the Impossible Burger. I wouldn't even
Well,
try.
I'm in favor of it as a step
Mhm.
toward a plant-based diet. And the young are going to go there because they are interested primarily in animal rights. And this is excellent for animal rights. Also, when you gut a chicken or you gut a cow,
Yeah,
the fecal material gets all over the lamb chops, the steaks, and the eggs, and the chicken and the meat. When you're growing cultured meat, as you do when you have the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Burger, there are no intestines in that stuff. So the likelihood of those infections, E. coli and salmonella, are much less.
But there's a lot of fat.
But they'll still kill you with heart disease, cancer, and stroke and diabetes.
The fat and the salt.
thank you.
Okay.
I have just sent out Janet's email for the handout and other questions to everyone in chat.
Oh,
Anything?
look, read that. I see the question. I face a dilemma with Shabbat to go, too much chicken and beef. Okay, so this is why we don't do the Shabbat to go. I mean, I'm hoping that if you maybe requested, they would give you a vegan alternative or at least some vegetables and not the meat or chicken choice. I know sometimes the sisterhood has stepped up, and I know when we ask, they always give us a vegan option. So I think that's something you have to request. I think if they know that that's an important choice for you, I think that
Tell them if
they'll
they're
respond.
professing Jewish values,
Right.
they
That's the other issue.
shouldn't be treating animals that way.
Well, you know, when I was young in Brooklyn, are you from New York, Steve?
Yeah, Rockaway Beach.
You look like it, yeah. So,
He looks like
basically, you're probably gonna know what I'm talking about, and anybody else who knows this. There were kosher dairy restaurants in Brooklyn, and they had a delicious thing called a vegetable cutlet.
Vegetable cutlet, yay.
Now,
Yeah,
I wish we
yes.
could get that here at the Temple Meals, or somebody would make that. You
Deep
don't see
fried.
that.
no, that's a good idea. Yeah, I've made them also, and they're fine, and that's a very good choice.
Most
love
of them are
them as a
deep fried. You want to
No, but
avoid
they
those.
don't have to be. You
They
can
don't
bake
have to
them.
be,
You
right.
can bake them. I've made them. I've baked them out of chickpeas, and absolutely, it should be
Yeah,
a choice.